Anubis intimidated everyone he crossed paths with, and it was immediately clear why. This was no ordinary dog. The moment Anubis and his owner, David, stepped inside the vet's office, the veterinarian's expression darkened. Without hesitation, he reached for the phone. David, sitting in the waiting room, was completely oblivious to what was unfolding, but the police were about to make him regret ever buying this dog. David's instincts screamed at him to grab Anubis and run. He still didn't understand why the vet had called the police, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't let them take his dog. But it was already too late. Before he could make it to the door, flashing red and blue lights flooded the clinic. The police stormed in, blocking every exit. David's heart pounded. He wouldn't give up Anubis without a fight. But then, as the officers began to explain, his anger turned to shock. Everything suddenly became clear. Anubis was far from an ordinary dog. But why had the vet contacted the police? What was wrong with Anubis? Could David accept giving him up? David hadn't even planned on buying a dog that day, yet the moment he locked eyes with Anubis, something inside him shifted. The look lasted only a moment before the dog, a massive, black beast with piercing yellow eyes, turned his gaze back to the wall of the pen. David took a step closer. He wasn't sure why. Part of him was afraid. And yet, he knew he was taking this dog home. David had two reasons for making the decision. First, he had already mentally named him Anubis. Second, the shady-looking man selling him didn't seem to care about the animals at all. This one just came. "Yesterday," the man grunted. "Everyone says he looks too mean, probably gonna end up at animal control." David's stomach twisted. Euthanized. If no one bought him, Anubis would be put down. He couldn't let that happen. David braced himself. A dog like this? The man would charge a fortune. But the seller just wanted to get rid of him. David hesitated. He should call his wife, Monica. After all, they had 4-year-old twins at home. A dog like this? Dangerous. Unpredictable. But as the seller began packing up, David knew. If he walked away now, Anubis would be dead by morning. So, without another word, he paid the man, and the strange, silent dog followed him home. Anubis sat eerily still in the truck, staring out the window. Not a single sound escaped him. Had he been trained? A police or military dog that failed the cut? This kind of calm wasn't normal. As they pulled into the driveway, David's stomach tightened. His wife was watching, and she was furious. Before Monica could reach the door, their twin boys, Melvin and Marty, burst outside. David tightened his grip on Anubis's leash. Would he react? Monica rushed behind the boys, her fear unmistakable. But Anubis did nothing. Just stood there, silent and still. The twins squealed with excitement, running circles around him. "The coolest dog ever!" they shouted. Monica's anger faltered, but it wasn't gone. "You bought a dangerous-looking dog from a random guy at a farmer's market?" Monica's voice shook with anger. David sighed. She was right. What had he been thinking? Monica demanded an explanation, and David gave her one. When he told her about the kill shelter, her expression softened. She still wasn't happy, but she understood, and though she wouldn't admit it yet, she kind of liked Anubis. Still, Monica worried. The twins were loud, energetic. How would Anubis react? David agreed. They needed to be careful at first, but soon Anubis would prove himself more than just a pet. He was a guardian. Nothing seemed to bother him, and his intimidating presence alone was enough to scare off potential intruders. Monica and David found it unnerving, but Anubis didn't seem to care. When David walked him through the park, people instinctively stepped aside. Dog owners, joggers, everyone kept their distance, and still, Anubis remained the same as day one. Silent, watching, waiting. A month had passed, and David still wasn't sure. What kind of dog had he brought home? David couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. Anubis wasn't just calm. He was completely devoid of emotion. Nothing upset him. Nothing excited him. It was like he was simply observing, watching the world with an eerie, silent awareness. David booked an appointment for Anubis at the vet. hoping for some answers. But this wouldn't be just a routine checkup. This visit would turn into an ordeal beyond his worst nightmares. David spent hours digging through research, trying to pinpoint Anubis's breed. Nothing quite matched. No known breed seemed to fit his dog's unsettling presence. David had theories, but deep down, he knew. Only a professional could uncover the truth. The twins begged to come along to the vet. They could help keep Anubis calm. They insisted, but David decided against it. If something was wrong with the dog, he didn't want his children anywhere near the discovery. Not that Anubis needed help staying calm. David was certain nothing could rattle this dog. But David, he was about to experience fear like never before. That afternoon, the vet's office was packed. Emergency cases had thrown the schedule off, and David found himself waiting longer than expected. And as usual, Anubis attracted attention. Nervous glances, whispered conversations, dog owners clutching their pets tighter. David sighed. By now he was used to it. But this time, it would come back to bite him. A vet assistant approached, hesitantly, avoiding eye contact. I'm so sorry, she stammered, clearly embarrassed. But, could you wait outside? David's stomach dropped. Some of the other clients feel unsafe. David glanced down at Anubis, who sat motionless beside him, his golden eyes unreadable. This dog wouldn't hurt a fly unprovoked. David knew that. But because of his looks, he'd always be mistrusted. The waiting room had gone silent. People looked away, pretending not to watch. David exhaled slowly, swallowing his, frustration. Without a word, he led Anubis outside. And with that one step, everything changed. They hadn't been outside for more than a few minutes when a man in a long coat walked past. Then, he stopped. His head turned sharply toward Anubis. David tensed. The man's piercing gaze locked onto the dog, his expression unreadable. Is he yours? He finally asked. David hesitated before nodding. To his surprise, the man knelt beside Anubis. Unlike most people, he wasn't afraid. In fact, he seemed almost fascinated. I'm the senior veterinarian here, the man said, brushing his hand over Anubis's sleek black fur. He spoke calmly, but there was something in his voice, something unsettling. He didn't explain why Anubis had caught his attention. But when he offered to personally handle the appointment, David couldn't shake the feeling that this man knew something he didn't. The offer seemed too eager, but the air outside was cold, and waiting any longer felt pointless. So David agreed, a decision he would soon regret. Inside, David could feel the stares. People in the waiting room had realized he'd been bumped ahead. The angry whispers were impossible to miss. David didn't care. Let them judge. The senior vet was already waiting in the exam room, fully suited up in protective gear. David's brow furrowed. This looked less like a routine checkup, and more like prepping for surgery. David explained his concerns. Anubis's strange behavior, his unshakable calm, the fact that he didn't seem like any known breed. But the vet barely acknowledged him. He was too focused on Anubis, studying him, examining him, like he was something rare, something dangerous. Halfway through the checkup, the vet abruptly cut him off. I need to take care of something, he said flatly. Then, he disappeared through a side door. The door clicked shut behind him. David blinked. What the hell? Muffled voices murmured on the other side of the door. David leaned closer, but he couldn't make out the words. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. The vet never came back. David's patience was running thin. What was going on? When he finally reached for the door handle, it was locked. David's pulse spiked. He knocked, then pounded. Hello? No answer. The voices had stopped. A cold, uneasy silence pressed against him. His mind raced. Were they doing something to Anubis? Why? Were they locking him in? His frustration boiled over. His heart pounded in his ears. Then, a sudden burst of rage. David's foot slammed against the door, and it burst open. The door swung violently, crashing against the wall. David's breath came hard and fast, but the vet, he barely flinched. He stood calmly in the adjacent room, hands folded, watching David like he'd expected this all along. And David realized something was very, very wrong. David, frustrated and alarmed, demanded an explanation. The vet, after briefly checking his watch, finally addressed him. He informed David that he had contacted the police about him and Anubis, and that they could arrive at any moment. David was stunned. He demanded to know why, but the vet simply told him that the police would do a better job of explaining than he could. Still fueled by adrenaline from kicking in the door, David's mind raced. He was convinced the police were there to take Anubis away, and he wasn't going to let that happen. With Anubis following close behind, David sprinted toward the other door, desperate to escape. But it was too late. The police had already surrounded the building. As soon as he stepped outside, the officers stopped him in his tracks. It was clear they intended to take Anubis, as an animal control vehicle was parked nearby. But David refused to back down. He stood protectively in front of Anubis, shouting that if they wanted the dog, they would have to go through him. One of the officers slowly stepped forward, making calming gestures with his hands. In a measured tone, he explained that the senior vet had identified Anubis during the examination and immediately contacted the authorities. The officer then revealed a shocking truth. The dog David had bought from a shady seller was no ordinary Mexican hairless dog. Anubis, whose real name was Zolo, belonged to a well-known religious leader in Mexico City, famous for preaching the EI's words and traditions of the Aztecs. The officer went on to explain the deep cultural significance of Zolo's breed. According to legend, these dogs guided the souls of the dead to the underworld, a terrifying thought for any devout believer. Zolo played an essential role in religious ceremonies, particularly funerals. His calm presence comforted grieving families, symbolizing that God had not taken their loved one's soul to the underworld. His unshakable demeanor was the result of years of specialized training. A few months ago, Zolo had been stolen by non-believers. It was widely assumed he had been put down, yet somehow he had ended up in the hands of the shady seller, from whom David unknowingly purchased him. David was stunned. Suddenly, all of his lingering questions about Anubis made sense. Though the realization was painful, he knew he had to do the right thing. Zolo belonged with his rightful owner, where he could continue his important work. Even so, saying goodbye was difficult. In the end, David surrendered Zolo, and the dog was returned to his owner in Mexico. Grateful for Zolo's safe return, the Augi religious leader, a wealthy man, rewarded David generously. Later, David and his family adopted a new dog, ensuring this time that it came with proper paperwork and the full approval of everyone in the household. From time to time, David still thought about Anubis.